بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Let's let the people in middle. All right, okie dokie. Nathan is still joining us. Let's let him in. Taking a while for him to get in. All right, here we are at last in the first chapter of the bezels of wisdom, the wisdom of divinity in the word of Adam. That's a hikmah ilahiyah fi kalima adamiyah. Before I start, I want you to note something as I read the first few paragraphs of this, because it is a very central element and probably a key to the entirety of the Fusus al-Hikam. And that is, in the preface, we see that Ibn Arabi relates a dream that he has of the Prophet Muhammad, who hands him this very book, the Bezels of Wisdom, to take to humanity. Now, we also read then in the first paragraph of the Fusus al-Hikam that God creates the cosmos in the form of Adam as a mirror of himself. So the prologue of the Bezels of Wisdom stands in the same relation to the creation of the world, right? That we read in the very first chapter, as the Fusus al-Hikam is for Ibn Arabi, being given this book. So in that dream, Muhammad, whether you take it as the historical Muhammad, as the Haqiqa Muhammadiyah, or whatever, is standing in the relation to the Godhead that we read in this very first paragraph of the Fusus al-Hikam. See the parallels between that relationship between the two, because it's extremely important. And in this, a very implicit but very central claim, obviously controversial, is being made by Ibn Arabi. As we will read in the following chapters, this becomes even more explicit by him. But it is one of those things that you cannot basically brush aside, despite the attempts and the mental gymnastics of many commentators since and many contemporary academic scholars who kind of take a very conservative, domesticated view of Ibn Arabi. It's not something you can dismiss that easily. Anyway, let's start. So the reality, al-Haqiqa, wanted to see the essence of his most beautiful names, or to put it another way, to see his own essence in an all-inclusive object encompassing the whole divine command, which, qualified by existence, would reveal to him his own mystery. For the seeing of a thing itself by itself is not the same as its seeing itself in another, as it were in a mirror. For it appears to itself in a form that is invested by the location of the vision, by which would only appear to it given the existence of the location and the locations or locus' self-disclosure to it. Right? So what does Ibn Arabi tell us from the prologue? That the Fusus al-Hikam represent, and Ibn Arabi specifically, represents Muhammad looking at himself in a mirror, right? And this mirror, the form that appears in it, is none other than Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi and the book that he has been given, which is the secret doctrine in the form of the Bezels of Wisdom. So the reality gave existence to the whole cosmos at first as an undifferentiated thing without anything of the spirit in it, so that it was like an unpolished mirror. It is in the nature of the divine determination that he does not set out a location except to receive a divine spirit, which is called in the Quran the breathing into it. The latter is nothing other than the coming into operation of the undifferentiated form's innate disposition to receive the inexhaustible overflowing of self-revelation, which has always been and will ever be. There is only that which is receptive, and the receptive has been only from the most holy superabundance of the reality. For all power to act, all initiative is from it in the beginning and at the end. All command derives from it, even as it begins with him. Thus, the divine command required by its very nature the reflective characteristic of the mirror of the cosmos. And Adam was the very principle of reflection for that mirror and the spirit of that form, while the angels were only certain faculties of that form, which was the form of the cosmos, called in the terminology of the folk, the great man. In relation to it, the angels are as the psychic and physical faculties in the human formation. Each of these cosmic faculties or powers is veiled from knowing the whole by its own self, being limited by its relative individuality, so that it cannot know anything that excels it. It also claims that it has the qualification for every high position and exalted abode with God by virtue of its participation in the divine synthesis, deriving both from the sphere of divinity and the reality of realities, and finally, with respect to the formation, assuming these characteristics from the exigencies of the universal nature, which contains and comprises all the receptivities of the cosmos, higher and lower. This knowledge cannot be arrived at by the intellect by means of any rational thought process, for this kind of perception comes only by a divine disclosure from which is ascertained the origin of the forms of the cosmos receiving the spirits. The above-mentioned formation is called man and vicegerent, Khalifa of God. As for the first term, it stems from the universality of his formation and the fact that he embraces all the realities. For the reality, he is as the pupil is for the eye through which the act of seeing takes place. Thus he is called insan, meaning both man and pupil. For it is by him that the reality looks on his creation and bestows the mercy of existence on them. He is man, the transient in his form, the eternal in his essence. He is the perpetual, the everlasting, the at once discriminating and unifying word. Of course, the Arabic here is insan, which is not qualified by gender. It is inclusive of both genders. It is by his existence that the cosmos subsists, and he is in relation to the cosmos as the seal is to the ring. The seal being that place whereon is engraved the token with which the king seals his treasure. So he's called the vicegerent. For by him, God preserves his creation as the seal preserves the king's treasure. So long as the king's seal is on it, no one dares to open it except by his permission, the seal being, as it were, a regent in charge of the kingdom. Even so is the cosmos preserved so long as the perfect human or perfect man, insan al-kamil, remains in it, or complete human rather. Do you not see that when he shall cease to be present in it, and when the seal on the treasury of the lower world is broken, none of what the reality preserved will endure, and all of it will depart, each part thereof becoming reunited with every other part, after which the whole will be transferred to the final abode where the perfect human, the perfect man, will be the seal forever. All the names constituting the divine image are manifest in the human formation, so that this information enjoys the degree by which it encompasses and integrates all existence. It is for this reason that God holds the conclusive argument against the angels in their protest at his command to prostrate to Adam. So take care. But God warns you by the example of another, and consider from whence the arraigned one is charged. For the angels did not grasp the meaning of the formation of God's regent, nor did they understand the essential servitude demanded by the plane of reality. For none knows anything of the reality save that which is itself implicit in the essence of the reality. The angels do not enjoy the comprehensiveness of Adam and comprehend only those divine names peculiar to them, by which they glorify and sanctify the reality, nor are they aware that God has names of which they know nothing and by which they cannot glorify him, nor are they able to sanctify him with the complete sanctification of Adam. Their condition and limitation being what it is, they said concerning his formation, will you put in it in the earth one who will work mischief in it or shed blood in it, meaning his rebellion, which is precisely what they themselves evince. For what they say of Adam applies equally to their own attitude towards the reality. but for the fact that their own formation imposes the limitation of knowledge, they would not have said what they said concerning Adam, but they are not aware of this. If they indeed knew their own essential selves, they would know their limitation, and if that were so, they would have been spared their mistaken utterance. Furthermore, they would not have persisted in their challenge by calling attention to their own more restricted glorification of God, as also their limited sanctification. Adam enshrines divine names. The angels have no pardon, nor are they able to glorify their Lord by them to exalt his transcendence, as Adam does. God expounds the whole affair to us so that we might bear it in mind and learn from it the proper attitude towards him, unless we ignorantly flaunt what little individually restricted insight or understanding we might have realized. Indeed, how can we make claims concerning something, the reality of which we have not experienced, and concerning which we have no knowledge, without exposing ourselves to ridicule? This divine instruction concerning the angels is one of the ways in which the reality instructs his own trusted servants, his representatives. Then let us now return to this wisdom. Know that the universals, the kulliyat, even though they have no tangible individual existence in themselves, yet are conceived of and known in the mind. This is certain. They are always unmanifest as regards individual existence, while imposing their effects on all such existence. Indeed, individual existence is nothing other than an outer manifestation of them, of these universals. That is to say, the universals. In themselves, they're always intelligible, ma'ulat. They are manifest as being individual beings, and they are unmanifest as being purely intelligible. Every individual existence is dependent on the universals, which can never be disassociated from the intellect, nor can they exist individually in such a way that they would cease to be intelligible. Whether the individual being is determined temporarily or not, its relationship in both cases is one and the same. However, the universal and the individual being may share a common determining principle according as the essential realities of the individual beings demand, as for example in the relationship between knowledge and the knower or life and living, etc. Life is an intelligible reality as also knowledge, each being distinguished from the other. Thus, concerning the reality, we say that he has life and knowledge, and also that he is living and knowing. This we also say of man and the angels. The reality of knowledge is always one, as is the reality of life, and the relationship of each respectively to the knower and the living remains always the same. Concerning the knowledge of the reality, we say that it is eternal, whereas of man's knowledge, we say that it is contingent. Consider then how attachment to the determinate renders something in the intelligible reality contingent, and consider the interdependence of universals and individual existence. For even as knowledge determines one who applies it as being a knower, so also does the one thus described determine knowledge as being contingent in the case of the contingent, the knower, and eternal in the case of the eternal one, both determining and determined. Further, even though the universals are intelligible, they enjoy no real existence, existing only insofar as they determine existent beings, just as they themselves are determined in any relationship with individual existence. As manifest in individual existence, they may admit of being in a sense determined, but they admit of no particularization or division, this being impossible. They're essentially present in each thing they qualify, as humanity is present in every human being, while not being particularized or divided according to the number of individual beings in which they are manifested, remaining purely intelligible. If, therefore, it is established that there is an interrelationship between that which has individual existence and that which has not, the latter being non-existent relations, the interconnection between one individual being and another is the more comprehensible because they have at least individual existence in common, whereas in the former instance, there's no unifying element. It is established that the originated is completely dependent on that which brings it about for its possibility. Its existence is entirely derived from something other than itself, the connection in this case being one of dependence. It is therefore necessary that which is the support of originated existence should be essentially and necessarily by itself self-sufficient and independent of another. This it is that bestows existence from its own essential being on dependent existence, in this way becoming related to it. Furthermore, since the former, because of its essence, requires the latter, the dependent, the latter has in a certain sense necessary being. Also, since its dependence on that form, and since its dependence on that from which it was manifested is implicit in its own essence, it follows that the originated should conform to all the names and attributes of the cause or origin, except that of self-sufficient being, which does not belong to originated existence, since what necessary being it has derives entirely from other than itself. Know that if what has been said concerning the manifestation of the originated in the form of the originator be true, it is clear that God draws our attention to what is originated as an aid to knowledge of him, and says in the Quran that he will show forth his signs in it. Thus he suggests that knowledge of him is inferred in knowledge of ourselves. Whenever we ascribe any quality to him, we are ourselves a representative of that quality, except it be the quality of his self-sufficient being, meaning Al-Qayyum, since we know him through ourselves, and from ourselves, we attribute to him all we attribute to ourselves. It is for this reason that the divine revelations come to us through the mouths of the interpreters, the prophets, for he describes himself to us through us. If we witness him, we witness ourselves, and when he sees us, he looks on himself. There's no doubt that we, as individuals and types, many and that, though representatives of a single reality, we know definitely that there's a factor distinguishing one individual from another, but for which multiplicity would not be implicit in the one. In the same way, even if we describe ourselves as he describes himself, in all possible aspects, there will still remain an inevitable factor of distinction between him and us. This factor is our dependence on him for existence, which in our case derives entirely from him, because we are originated while he is free of all dependence whatsoever. Thus, he is rightly called the one without beginning, the Ancient of Days, contradicting all priority in the sense of existence, starting from non-existence. For although he is the first, no temporal priority may be attributed to him. Thus he is called also the last. Even if he were the first in the sense of being the first determined existence, he could not be called the last in this sense, since contingent being has no end, being infinite. He is called the last only in the sense that all reality, though reality be attributed to us, is his. His finality is essentially implicit in his priority, as his priority essentially implicit in his finality. Know also that the reality has described himself as being the outer and inner manifest and unmanifest. As Zahir al-Batin, he brought the cosmos into being as constituting an unseen realm and a sensory realm, so that we might perceive the inner through our unseen and the outer through our sensory aspect. He has also attributed of himself pleasure and wrath, having created the cosmos as expressing both fear and hope, fear of his wrath and hope for his pleasure. He has also described himself as being possessed of beauty and majesty, having created us as combining awe of his majesty and intimacy, and so on with all its attributes and names. He has expressed this polarity of qualities in the Quran as being his hands devoted to the creation of the perfect man, or complete human, who integrates in himself all cosmic realities and their individual manifestations. The cosmos is the sensory realm, both subtle and gross, and the vicegerent is unseen. For this reason, the ruler is veiled, since the reality has described himself as being hidden in veils of darkness, which are the natural forms, and by veils of life, which are the subtle spirit. The cosmos consists of that which is gross and that which is subtle, and is therefore, in both aspects, the veil covering its own true self or reality. For the cosmos does not perceive the reality as he perceives himself, nor can it ever not be veiled, knowing itself to be distinct from its creator and dependent on him. Indeed, it has no part in the divine self-sufficiency of being of the reality, nor will it ever attain to that. In this sense, the reality can never be known by cosmic being in any way, since originated being has no part in that self-sufficiency. God unites the polarity of qualities only in Adam to confer a distinction on him. Thus he says to Lucifer, or the devil, what prevents you from prostrating to the one whom I have created with my two hands? What prevents Iblis is the very fact that he, the human, unites in himself the two modes, the originated cosmos and the originating and original reality, which are his two hands. Right? Just keep this definition in mind because it will reoccur again and again. Right? The two modes, the originated cosmos, right? The world, outer world is one hand, and the originating and original reality, which is the other hand. Right? These are the two, Ibn Arabi's definition of the two hands of God. As for Lucifer or Iblis, he's only a part of the cosmos and has no share in this synthesis, by virtue of which Adam is the regent. Were he not manifest in the cosmos in the form of him whom he represents, he would not be the regent, and were it not to comprise all that his dependent charge requires, or were he unable to meet all the requirements, he would not be the regent. In short, the regency is fitting only for the perfect human. The Insan al-Kamil. His outer form he composed of the cosmic realities and forms, while his inner form he composed to match his own form. Thus he says in the sacred tradition, I am his hearing and his sight, the Hadith of Qurban al-Wafel, and not I am his eye and his ear, in order to show the distinction between the two forms, the imperceptible and the perceptible. Likewise, he is implicit in every cosmic being according as the essential reality manifested in that being requires it, providing it is understood that no other being enjoys the synthesis of divine realities possessed by the regent. It is only by virtue of this synthesis that he is superior to all other beings. Were it not that the reality permeates all beings as form in its qualitative form, and were it not for the intelligible reality, no essential determination would be manifest in individual beings. Thus, the dependence of the cosmos on the reality for its existence is an essential factor. All is dependent upon another, naught is independent. This is the pure truth. We speak it out plainly. If I mention one self-sufficient independent, you will know to whom I refer. All is bound up with all. There is no escaping this bond, so consider carefully what I say. You are now acquainted with the wisdom involved in the corporeal formation of Adam, his outer form, as you have become acquainted with the spiritual formation of Adam, his inner form. Namely, that he is the reality as regards the latter, and that he is creature as regards the former. You have also learned to know his rank as the all-synthesizing, all-comprehensive form by which he merits the divine regency. Adam is that single soul, that single spiritual essence from which humankind was created. As he says, O men or all humans, Ya ayyuhan nas, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul and created from it its mate, so that from them both there issued forth many men and women. His saying, fear your Lord, Allah, means make your outer transient selves. This is the absolute genius interpretation of this verse by the Sheikh. His saying, fear your Lord, Allah, means make your outer transient selves a protection for your Lord, your inner essential reality, and make your inner reality, which is your Lord, a protection for your outer selves. This is the key to all praxis, right there in that statement by Ibn Arabi. All creation involves censure, negation, and praise, affirmation. So be his protection as regards censure as being relative beings, and make him your protection as regards praise as being identified with the Adamic reality, so that you are of those who act properly and are possessed of knowledge. Let me take a sip of water here, please. Thus, then, he, most high and gracious, caused Adam to look on all he had deposited in him and held it in his hands, active and passive, essential and formal, in the first hand the cosmos, and in the other Adam and his seed expounding their degrees. When God revealed to me in my innermost center what he had deposited in our great progenitor, I recorded in this book only that which he dictated to me, not all I was given, since no book can contain all of it, nor yet the cosmos as now existing. Of what I witnessed in the spirit, and of that what I recorded in this book as laid down by the prophet, are the following chapters, and he goes through names of all the chapters, which I don't need to read. The seal of each wisdom is the word assigned to it. I have restricted myself in what I have written concerning the divine manifestation of wisdom in this book to what is confirmed in what respect in the heavenly book. I have transcribed faithfully according to as was vouchsafed to me. Even had I wished to add to it, I would not have been able to do so, since the plane from which it came would prevent anything of this kind. God it is who grants success, and he is the sole Lord. And that was first chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, the most central chapter and key to understanding everything else he says throughout the next 26 chapters. Who wants to take the floor first? It's all yours. I've been reading for the last almost half an hour.
Hi,
Hi.
this is Yosi. This is Yosi, and yeah, that was very beautiful and enlightening. I really liked how it almost seems like Ibn Arabi writes with ease these
Mm.
very sophisticated ideas and the interrelationships between the originating and the originated and the original, and it's a the the idea of that but which is contingent and that which is the contingency, and how they are how they're supposed to not be understood in isolation of each other, but they are supposed to be seen in the reflection of the divinity which grounds them. It's a I'm sorry if the mentioning of Holy Trinity is not appropriate for this
No,
discussion.
actually, it is appropriate. It's just that the way we won't talk about Trinity. We talk about triplicity, which I think is an even more complex idea. Ibn Arabi actually, when we get to the chapter, he actually talks about this, that all things divine come in threes, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that this is sort of the greater divine dialectic of things. So the originator, the originating, and the originated fill in this process of the divine reality itself. So in the case of this first chapter of Adam, as he says from the very first paragraph, there's God, there is the mirror, and there's Adam, right? This is the cosmos. And where he's talking about Adam, he's not necessarily talking about a physical person. He's talking about the cosmos as a whole and the human being as the reflection of this cosmos, right? So the microcosm in the macrocosm as the mirror of God.
Yeah, that's another thing that I noticed, that all the names of gods are qualities that we also possess. And
Yes,
so if we say that God is all forgiving, that we have to remember that we
yes.
can be the his representative of forgiveness on this earth, and that's what we are
100%. Yep.
supposed to embody as a Muslim and as a faithful, as a pious person.
Sure,
We can be.
you can even take it a step further than that. We can say, and he says this, that all the names are relations. Okay? There are no specific realities, individuated realities of mercy, of wrath, of, you know, constriction, expansion. All of these things are relations, right? They don't possess an independent reality other than the real or the reality itself, al-haqiqa. So every name and attribute that we apply to Allah subhanahu is actually the water taking on the color of the cup, right? So it is that locus of the appearance of God in that particular quality, that particular mode, right? And that is why he insists that, and he puts his finger on this, that the God describes itself to us, right? And that by knowing ourselves, so by knowing our qualities of mercy, wrath, contraction, expansion, burst, last, manifest, hidden, this is how we get to understand what God is, what divinity is, uh, whatever language you want to use to describe it.
Yes. And if we believe that God is all good, that we have to believe that existence in itself is all good, and we have to.
Sure, but all good,
Yeah.
even that is
That's Plotinus's argument, isn't
that's
it? That's from the
Plotinus' argument.
Enneads. Yeah.
Straight from
I feel like this one is just a little like a misunderstanding of creation and Gnosticism a little. I mean, there is the old like obviously God can't do bad versus obviously it can, which is what this argument boils down to is like, can God do bad? But I think that bad is again another one of those, like you said, relations. You
yeah,
know, it's
well,
entirely contingent upon the relationship of the affected to the affecter.
yeah,
So that's just my 2 cents on
yeah,
is creation good or bad, or is God good or bad?
yeah. I mean, goodness, bad, good, bad. All of these are relations. They're they operate in relation to some event or something or some object, right? God is not an object. So if God is not an object, then the subject perceiving goodness or badness is perceiving that goodness or God is. So that attribute or name that is self-disclosing is this self-disclosing to that particular locus in that particular form of goodness or badness. But in itself, it is a relation. It is neutral. It is. It's just pure being.
Okay. In my understanding, the way I understood those words was that the good is the primordial being and bad is a shadow of it. Bad is what is evil is just only a derivative of it. So yeah.
Well, let's
Yeah.
kind of wait here on this very concept of what is evil. Evil is privation, right? In this whole Neoplatonic universe, it doesn't possess an abiding reality. Shadow is also what the light casts, right? We're going to get, as we get further into this book, he's going to kind of delineate for us and expand for us that shadow and light are just two poles of a dialectic, even if the light itself is the primary agent, right? But it is the light that is casting the shadow. That shadow has no independent reality without the light. It is because of the light.
Yes, that
Yeah,
yeah, that is exactly what I meant. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
privation theory.
So even privation in Ibn Arabi has a plenitude merely by virtue of its relation to its first agent.
I'm sorry I missed all the previous sessions. So
No
I will
worries.
catch up with the
No problem.
yeah I will catch up with the 50 pages that I missed.
No problem.
When I think of Akbarian dialectics, like this sort of very, like this epistemic spiritual version of the material Marxist dialectics, I think of the self-reproaching soul and how God loves those who hold themselves to account before they die. You know, you take account of all your deeds or whatever. And I view it as this process of essentially like continual negation.
Yes.
And there's this that's great and it's worked really well for me. But when I was reading this, I had this extra thought that it's not that this dialectic relationship, it's not just about, you know, self-negation, self-negation, self-negation. It's there's a reciprocity to it
Yes.
between the Lord and the servant, between the locus of the Lord and the non-delimited, like non-local, universal Lord. And I thought that that was really interesting because I don't know how I just glossed over his assertion that all of existence is just receptivity
Yes.
when I first read this, but it seems like something that is I had basically completely glossed over to go into this sort of apophatic, like or cataphat, one of the two, the one of negation.
This is what
Um,
he's saying when we come to it, and he puts that refrain in, he not he, who Allah hua. Well, this is what he's saying, that at every moment there is negation and plenitude, cataphasis and apophasis. Every time God self-discloses, that self-disclosure then becomes the basis of its own apophatic undoing, because it is not it. It
I
is and
just
it isn't,
love,
right?
yeah, I
It
just
fills
love that relationship.
and that replenishment is consumed, right, by the locus, as it were, right?
That is that the same as becoming subsistent?
Yes, but the subsistent is obviously self-subsistent is always God.
Right. I mean, there's degrees of a sort.
Yeah,
I had this, maybe this is something to bring up later, but for now, I just really liked that opening focus
yeah,
on the relationship between receptivity and requital, basically.
yeah. This is why this notion of creation at each moment is such a central metaphysical concept in Ibn Arabi, that he grounds completely in the Quran. كل يوم هو في شأن, every day is upon some new task. So if you take that, then this whole dialectic of apophatic cataphasis in relation to yourself and your own suluk becomes even more coherent at every moment.
Right. Thank you. And then maybe this goes without saying, since I know that there's a lot of people in here who have studied things like Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism, but the Insan Kamil, it basically fits with like all the best Christological models
Yeah,
in my eyes as well. Like this is the authorized bearer of the divine name or the divine authority, like speaking as a representative on earth. The perfect person and the Christ are the same in that regard. There's some early Christians that are like, the Christ is the essence. No, it's the healer, it's like it's the vice regent. But I think the thrust of early Christianity was probably to remediate any difference between the essence and the vice regency, you know. Um, I just I think that this whole idea of the perfect person is the most Christian thing in Islam. Maybe
but
not. Maybe that's not true,
hold
but it's
on,
a very Christian
just
artifact in my
hold
mind.
on. This word perfect. Let's examine this word perfect.
Okay.
Kamil can mean perfect, but in actuality, the semantic of kamil means complete. So perfect is an inference taken from, because it's also in the form
Would
or.
actualized be a good translation?
Actualize is a consequence of the completion. So that means full, right?
Like pleroma.
Yeah. So an insan kamil is a complete human who is full. Full with what? With Allah, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Which
Thank you.
per the first chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, the name Allah itself actually applies to Adam in the generic sense of the universal human.
Does it apply like sui generis, or is it just that the name comprehends Adam in addition to
The
everything
name
else?
comprehends Adam as the intelligible that he told us about.
Okay, so now we're getting into knower and known type
Yes,
territory. Okay. Okay, thank you.
sure. Hassan, Hussein,
So let me just ask, piggyback on that for a sec. So
sure.
the concept of insan kamil, like, would you say that there even could be possibly an actual representative in the flesh, or are we talking like Adam? Like for me, Adam is the insan kamil,
Mhm.
and people, they can try as they
Adam,
might,
yeah,
but
for the purposes of this book, Adam represents the first archetype, right? So just remember, here in this book, he's not actually talking about historical people. He's using these prophet figures of the Quran to
Mhm.
flesh out an archetype about what these are. So all of these prophets actually represent archetypes.
Right, exactly.
Jeff,
And
if
and
you're
so
asking if the insan Kamil is supposed to be like aspirational, I would say yes.
Of course, sure, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but never probably fully realized like in a singular person
Well,
on
I don't
Earth.
know. I mean,
Ah,
when we read the next chapter, even Arabi is pretty much being very unequivocal about himself being that person.
Well,
As
I
we,
know, yeah,
as
of
we read
course.
in the
right.
next chapter.
I think it's
I
safer
see
to
it.
No,
I'm
no,
not going
go.
to say that theophany is like limited to these commules out here, but I do think that perhaps commules serve as like seats for theophany. Maybe that could
Mm,
distinguish them from
sure.
um, an everyday person. Uh, as to whether like anything is totally 100% like perfect or actualized or full, and there's no more that you can like
Well, I mean,
progress.
just that
I don't know. That's like a
that
different thing
that
to me a
whole
little bit.
concept of perfection in the way that at least I think from the Hellenistic and Platonic Aristotelian notion of what perfection means, I think is a little flawed. What Ibn Arabi is hinting at throughout this book is that what you think perfection is not perfection. Okay. Um, if that were the case, then there would not be a multiplicity of holy figures. Right. So God would have revealed everything all at once, and that was it. No more need for any further messages from upstairs. But that's not how it works because the theophanies are endless. And every moment is not the moment before it. It's, every moment is being created and recreated. So that the only perfection in that sense of perfection, if we want to even take that concept, is the real itself. Everything is just a mirror, mirroring that perfection and incapable of doing so in its, complete plenitude. That includes Muhammad, Jesus, all the prophets, everything.
Yeah, that's essentially what I was trying to say myself. Yeah, that's that sums it up perfectly. So I mean, there
Um,
are. Oh no, go
Sorry,
ahead, Mary. Sorry.
I just think you're kind of onto something. So it's like, it's exactly what Ibn Arabi was saying about how each locus only reflects in accordance with its own qualities, like because they are separate from the fullness that's like out there.
So it is impossible to bring that perfection. Well, I mean, if just as a kind of implied argument, the manifestation of absolute perfection, in a sense, means the end of all creation. That means that God has exhausted the manifestation of itself, which is a absurd proposition, because then that limits God by the possibilities of further manifestations after it, which means then that it is not perfect. So this notion of perfection that we have from in Western philosophy is itself a flawed concept because it is ending at a border of something. This is the perfect beyond which, this is the peak of the mount beyond which there's nowhere to go. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that perfection cannot be confined to a finitude.
Absolutely. And that is why it can be perfect because it cannot be fit into a finitude. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where my head was starting to go with this conversation, was that, perfection, as we've have this like kind of Aristotelian ideal of it is delimiting. It's not,
Extremely.
and because it's delimiting, it's not actually perfect in a sense. It's an image. It's idolatrous. It's that. It's just the idea that we have of what perfection actually is.
So then take that idea now and apply it to the revealed religions, and the claim to the perfection of a message in itself is a real problematic one, isn't it?
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, go on, Jeff.
so
I was just going,
go ahead, Jeff. Jeff.
oh, just very quick. I was going to mention the image of the mirror too. I mean, you could
Yes.
never get your mirror smooth enough, flat enough, and polished enough to reflect perfection anyways, you know what I mean? So if you're using that symbol, the mirror is always going to contain some distortion, probably, or some blemish somewhere, which is why
Yeah.
that there is a path.
Yeah, and extending that idea. So I'm sorry if I go way too off
No
course,
worries.
but there's this paper by David Walpert, 2007, Physical Limits of Inference. The paper makes the central claim that there can be no device which can infer, compute, or measure anything perfectly. Like it's just
Measure
in,
anything in what?
Right, that's in information theory, that's called transfer entropy.
Uh-huh.
It's the little bit
yeah,
of like
basic.
loss that's
So
happens.
yeah, so Walpert defines what inference means in a very mathematical terms, that there's device A and then there's device B and they are interacting. It's a very abstract language, but the central claim is that when one finite entity, which is separated away from another finite entity or any other quality, when it tries to interact with it and measure it, there is always the problem of self-referentiality. Like for
Mm.
example, an eye can I might see everything except for itself.
Mm.
Right. It's that it's even Ibn Arabi says that a being is separated away, like a finite being is separated away from the rest of the creation. And
Mhm.
so in that and the creation itself is separated away from the divinity which it is contingent upon. So it's that separation which makes us all, well, quote unquote, imperfect, and finite and fallen, like different languages are used by.
Sure.
But I that's how I understand that. Jeff brought up the example of no mirror can be polished enough. Similarly, no computer can be precise enough. No measuring tape. No brain can be. No vision can be astute enough. It's mathematically not possible.
It's
This has been
mathematically not fun.
demonstrated.
It's also logically a contradiction. You know, to assert a limit to perfection, the very concept of it, which the Greeks did, is a problem. That's why they didn't. It's a real quirky thing with the Greeks and even the Neoplatonists, where they look at the concept of indeterminacy and infinity as a deficiency, right? You know, things must be defined. You know, there has to be a limit to something in order for it to be perfect, which is, you know, not true. But yes, that's basically the definition of why we cannot define the perfect. Yeah.
Just to add to the conversation that somewhere in the introduction of Kaiseri is what said that the imperfections which are imposed on us by the level of existence in which we are from another point of view the very nature of perfection. It was talking, for example, about the prophets, which are the most, let's say, full or perfect images of Allah Ta'ala. Nevertheless, the fact that they eat, the fact that they feel pain, the fact that they may be disappointed in some point of their life, it only adds to their perfection, this type of paradox.
But also, if you then take that analogy, that also then applies to every human being, right? So, the ups and downs, the cravings or lacks, the highs and the lows, the sadness and the happiness, all of these things exist in every human being, just as they are in the prophets and the messengers and in Sikhumal, the perfect or complete humans. So this is why I think in the Abrahamic traditions, who have inherited quite a lot of biases from the Hellenistic world, there is this notion of perfection imputed to these figures. And you see this in Christianity, is the greatest example of this. That is not only unrealistic, but it is as if they are trying to make statues out of these figures, whether it be Jesus or whoever. Whereas in other traditions, and particularly the one that is extremely dear to me in the subcontinent, and that is the tantric tradition, in particularly the Shrividya Shakta for the Shrividya school, they look at all imperfection as the manifestations of the perfections of the goddess, right? So that with this form of tantric practice, you are not to seek the perfection of being within some unattainable concept of perfection. You're to find it. You're supposed to find a diamond in shit itself. That's why in alchemy you have this imagery of saying that the stone is found. The philosopher's stone itself is actually found in refuse, right? Part of that is to unpack and deconstruct these very false, limiting notions of perfections. Because if you hold on, and this is the trap that all of these Abrahamic traditions have consistently fallen into, about claiming the finality of their creed, right? They don't understand that by making that claim in a categorical way, they are actually negating the perfection of God itself. Because God, by definition, cannot exhaust itself. If something ends, then that means it is the end of that manifestation, right? And the hidden treasure must know itself in the infinitude of all manifestation. It cannot exhaust itself, right? So we can take even Arabi himself and argue against these literalist doctrines of the finality of Khatamiyya that has become such an idol in the minds of many Muslims, even during the time of Ibn Arabi itself. And what this book represents is an extremely novel way to both deconstruct this concept completely and then rearrange it in a very novel way that can be palatable and accepted to others. This is why, he uses this extremely mind-bending dialectic of starting a paragraph by making extremely orthodox statements, and then as you go through it, he's completely deconstructing every notion of orthodoxy. Then he ends up at a synthesis at the final end of the paragraph that is notionally orthodox, but it has gone through this process, this alchemical process in the paragraph of disentangling it from these limitations. That is why, as I've said many times, I look at the Sheikhi and the Babi legacy of the Islamic world as such an important one, because it overtly starts to express these ideas, and especially the Babis, in such a way that wasn't expressed as explicitly as this until then. But it is Ibn Arabi. It is basically the consummation of this idea there cannot be a terminus to God's self-revelations, because the manifestations are endless. So we have to then understand the concept of finality in another way. And what Ibn Arabi will offer us in the next chapter that we read next week, in the chapter of Seth, which scandalizes both Orthodox believers, yet it is the most cogent example of how this problem can be properly resolved. And you could, take his notion and reject it in a literalist way, but then reconstruct it in a more symbolic or even a historically um, present or normative kind of way simultaneously. These ideas are important without in any way negating the fundamental message of what Islam means, right? Which is not the finality of something. It is about the dependency of all things to the real. That is the real message of Islam. That is what Islam is. Rather than Muhammad is the final messenger, and that's it. We won't talk about anything further than that. Ibn Arabi is defying that very explicitly in this book.
Just to add one more sentence, that Kayseri in the explaining the unity of the straight path, Ahdiyatu Tariq al-Umam, he is saying, and this is universally accepted by mutakallimin, that in historical perspective, the different nation had different religions, but different religions meaning that they had different rituals, but the core of the faith in God, it was one and the same. So far, so good. Now, if we reverse time and place, if in historical perspective there were different religions, what is the problem? One and the same time, again, to have many religions with different rituals, just the core idea of belief in God to be the same.
Yes. No, you're correct. Yeah, that is the case. Yeah. This is why these exoteric understandings of religion, any religion, are, instead of liberating people, end up imprisoning people. But we got to be also, I mean, at least in this time, we have to be very careful because there have been many people who have come, many gurus and false masters who come in the guise of liberation and whatnot, and then ended up creating these cult organizations that have imprisoned people and violated people's dignities every which way and the other. And this is also a trap. Like, they've used the language of openness and liberation to imprison. So we gotta walk a fine line here on this
The
question.
weird contradiction between, false prophets and the closing of the book is that they I had a great point here. They are kind of doing the same thing, whether you're doing a false prophecy or you're trying to close the book unjustly, because I don't even think Muhammad's claims to be the seal of the prophets were like as literal or fundamental as many people interpret it as. He's saying he's the cornerstone the builders forgot. That's not like an odd assertion for a prophet to make if he's trying to build a project. But they're kind of doing the same thing, because whether you are doing false prophecy or whether you're unjustly trying to close up all prophecy, you are usurping the cause from God. You are
1,000%.
impinging upon
One-
God's actions in this world.
And God can do anything. I mean, I've talked about this in the past, that the contemporary scholarship is beginning to prove that this whole concept of khatamiyah did not mean end until the Abbasid period. This was a consensus that formed about what this means in the Abbasid period. Before it, the concept of khatam was basically as a seal, as a validation. So, khatam al-Nabi'in.
Right. He completes the
Yeah.
picture, basically.
Yeah, he
He's
completes
the
the
cornerstone.
It doesn't mean that this is the end. It was only in the Abbasid period where we get this development of this concept of khatam as meaning end. And a lot of that is historically based because during the first few decades of the Abbasid Caliphate, there were revolts, some of them with prophetic, very clear prophetic and messianic overtones against the Abbasids. So we see, as this concept develops, that the imperial state was then taking this concept of the seal and using it as a way to validate itself against potential rivals. Whether these rivals have been Shia Ismailis or the Khorrami movement that arose in Iran, Babak Khorramdin, who actually attempted a kind of a Islamic Zoroastrian synthesis and failed. So we gotta also go into the historical process in itself to understand where some of these dogmas originate. Yeah. Something all
Exactly,
the Sufis
yeah.
knew. All the Sufis have known this. They have known this from the beginning, and they've known that this was a consensus, that the establishment of the Abbasid period agreed to. The fact of, the activities of al-Hallaj, and some of the earlier Sufis is testimony to this fact, that, even at that kind of middle stage of the Abbasid era, this imposition of a meaning on Khatamiyya was understood for being an imposition and not being an actual original intended meaning.
Yeah, exactly. When I first read this translation, it translated the word katan as brick, and I kept being like, why are you talking about bricks? I had to like go back and figure it out, basically. But when I first learned about it, now because I know that brick association, I think of the cornerstone set tradition, because it's really old and it seems in reference to it. But before then, I just seen the word seal. I thought of it as the seal on a letter. And I associated it with the letter that shows up in a lot of Gnostic myth, like the Song of the Pearl, where the letter is sealed through speech. And I basically, that's how I interpreted it for a long time, even if that's not like technically correct.
So yeah, this concept is up for debate. Historically, it's opened up. I mean, it's a big red button to push with a lot of Orthodox Muslims, but nevertheless, this is the issue in this Fusus al-Hikam. However much certain people have tried to domesticate it, the Sheikh al-Akbar, once you read some of the stuff he says in this book, you can't do it. Because he was seriously making a claim for himself, but also the implications of the claims that he makes for himself go even beyond it. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Riaz.
Yeah. So I was wondering if okay, so on page 52, he talks about the angels, and he says, "So take care, for God warns you by the example of another." Paraphrasing that, for the angels did not grasp the meaning of the formation of God's region, nor did they understand the essential servitude demanded by the plane of reality. I think that like within this, he's also sort of, giving some flowers to the exoteric understanding of the religion, in the sense that the angels don't necessarily have a need for an exoteric understanding of the religion because they don't have an animal nature. Whereas we do. And I'm sort of like, I don't know if I'm reading this right, but I'm sort of taking this as sort of caution against being too esoterically fixated to sort of develop that pride.
Well, in the Futwat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi has a lot of connections at botanies. Now, he does this for a very specific reason. If we metaphoricize absolutely everything, right, that you create a chasm between the outer reality of things and the inner meaning of things, right? And some of the extreme botanies, and especially the Karmatis, had that tendency. But when Ibn Arabi is talking about the Zahir, he's not talking about dogma. He's not talking about Aqidah. Okay? He's talking about something far more complex and sophisticated. So he is, when you break down everything that he says, if once we get into the Wahdat al-Wujud, ultimately there's no inner or outer. There's no batin, there's no zahir. There's only Allah. These batin, zahir borders are demarcations that only occur in our world, in this, plane of universal nature of dualism and duality and all that kind of stuff. But the reality, the full haqiqa of the situation is that there is no inner or outer. There's only Allah. Right? So if that is the case, then if you start to push the batini argument a little bit too radically, you're actually committing the same kind of mistake that the Zahiris, the exotericists have done by putting borders and limitations and all the rest of it. Right? So this is where you got to understand this balance between the batin and the Zahir, and that the two are actually the same thing, ultimately. So when he phrases something like that, he will throw these little scraps to the Ahl al-Zahir, but with these caveats and understandings intact. He's not talking about the same thing that they're talking about. Something far more nuanced. But he will phrase it in their language just to quieten them down. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of Sahirs, if you can like catch me up on that.
Okay. Say that again, please.
I don't know who Zahirs are or what they believe, and what you just said. I just wanted, like, if you can briefly explain what Zahir is about.
Zahir is the outer, the manifest, right? And the batin is the inner. These are the Arabic terms.
Okay.
Yeah. The inner and the outer, the manifest and the hidden.
It's kind of like the difference between literal and analytical perspective.
Yeah.
So a Zahiri would be someone who's like kind of a fundamentalist.
Yeah, the dogmatist, the religious, literalist is basically what the Sufis call the Ahl al-Zahir, the people of the outer forms. And the Ahl al-Batin would be the pure ultra esotericists, or even a Gnostic with a capital G that sees no connection whatsoever between the material manifestation of things and their meanings. Whereas with Ibn Arabi, there is a complete continuity. There is no separation between, meaning and its manifestations of form and matter, etc.
There's actually an interdependence.
Yeah, there's a complete interdependence between the two of them and everything. Yeah.
How does this Ibn Arabi's theology fit in with Spinoza?
Spinoza is an interesting case because Spinoza, we know, knew the Kabbalah, knew Avicenna in the Latin translations, and is kind of pantheistic universe is kind of an outcome of that. But what Spinoza represents is a Cartesian rebranding of Descartes in a kind of a pseudo-Kabbalistic and pseudo-Avicennan kind of format. So he wasn't, you get a tendency in Spinoza sometimes of he doesn't talk about gradations and nuances. The whole natural universe becomes God. But this is a little bit problematic. I mean, I've read his Ethics a couple of times, and I've reflected on Spinoza for many, many, many years, and we know his sources. But it's not quite Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi has a real dialectic going on in it, right? Where everything is and is not God simultaneously. Because there is a constant creation and recreation, destruction happening at every instant. So, in Kashmiri Shaivism, we have Shiva as the destroyer, right? And the creator. So this concept is very much present in Ibn Arabi in a way that he conceives of the real, al-haq.
Yeah, I think this is the tension between the strict Spinozist kind of monism and what you said, triplicity.
Yeah. Yeah, with Ibn Arabi, this dialectic is constantly going. It's very animate. Yeah. Nathan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Just turn your mic up a little bit.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Great. Great.
You can hear me? Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
fine. Good. Yep.
My audio has been a little intermittent. It seems to me that in reading this chapter that Adam is sort of a barzakh, even an isthmus, a reality between realities, which to me suggests a reality of becoming.
That's a great insight. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Lord of the Two Gulfs.
Yeah. Let
Yes,
Nathan finish his thought. Go ahead, Nate.
well, no, that's just how I was reading the ideas presented in the chapter. That's just what struck me and came out at me, that we're seeing Adam have this bridge function, and of course that ties into Latin etymologies, a pontiff, a pontifex, a bridge maker. So there's that sacerdotal quality of Adam as archetype that we all as human beings participate in. That prophetic station may not be a station that all of us occupy, although I think many of us here might maintain it is sunnah to try.
Sure. That's the aim. That's the goal. Of the human life. Everything else is kind of tangential to this. To attain that station. However that be defined for you, in the Lord of your own being. Whatever your Lord, whatever name or attribute is that you are the manifestation of, to attain that that takmil, that completion. So yeah, 100%, that is what it represents. It is the barzakh. It is the barzakh between the inanimacy of Adamia. I mean, this is where, right at the beginning of the Futuhat. Maybe I should read my brief translation of the very introduction of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, because this kind of
Please.
Yeah, this puts this in a little bit more context. I have it here. Let me get it. Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Let's see. So this is first few paragraphs of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah that I think kind of nuances what we just read. He says, all praise is due to God who brought things into existence from non-existence, and again made it non-existence and suspended their existence upon the orientation of a single word, so that through it we may realize the secret of their generation and their primordiality from its primordiality. And thus we stand at this realization upon what it has informed us of the truth of its precedence. Exalted is it, for it has manifested, and yet it has concealed. It has revealed, and yet it has veiled. And the name, the first, affirmed the existence of the servant's essence, for indeed it was established. And the name, the last, affirmed the decree of annihilation and loss, for indeed it too was previously established. If not for durationless time and the temporal, the ignorant and the knowing, no one would understand the meaning of its names, the first and the last, nor the hidden and the manifest, even though its most beautiful names follow the highest order. Yet among them there is distinction in the ranks, which becomes apparent when means are adopted to address emerging matters. For the servant of the forbearing is not the same as the servant of the generous, and the servant of the forgiving is not the same as the servant of the grateful. Every servant has a name that is his Lord, and his heart is the body of that name. Thus, it is the all-knowing, glorified be it, who has known and taught knowledge. It is the judge who has ruled and established judgment. It is the supreme who has subdued and rendered submissive. It is the powerful who has decreed and ordained. Yet it did not determine for itself permanence, for it is the everlasting upon whom the attribute of permanence does not depend. It is sanctified in the moment of witnessing, from facing and encountering, for the servant in that most exalted station adheres to transcendence, not because it, the exalted and most high, in that most exalted station is subject to immanence. In that presence, the servant is stripped of all directions, and upon his arising in contemplation, all turning away from it is annihilated. I praise it with the praise of one who has realized that it, exalted be it, is most high in its attributes and its lofty that it is majestic in its essence and is manifest, the veil of might is drawn over it, and that the gate to knowing its essence is sealed. If it address its servant, then it is the hearer who makes heard. And if it acts upon what it has commanded, then it is the obeyed who obeys. And when this truth left me bewildered, I composed in accordance with the rule of the path of the Weistrin in the first poem of the Futuhat. The Lord is truth, the servant too. Yet if a servant dead is due, oh, would I know who bears the call, or if the Lord out-tasked at all. That was in the beginning of my translation at the beginning of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah.
Would you be willing to post that in the channel? I would like to
Yes,
take a look at that
Yeah, absolutely.
when I have a little more time.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I also thought it was interesting in this chapter too, where it really drove home for me the connection between the divine names and ontology, that we are for one thing, and epistemology, how we know, for another. And I say this because the discussion about the angels vis-a-vis the Adamic reality, that there are divine names within the Adamic reality, within humanity, that are absent from the nature of the angels, and therefore they can't comprehend them.
Yeah.
You need to have those names in order to have those openings to knowledge. And I think it's very interesting too to see this Abrahamic conception of the angels as, on the one hand, these very powerful, quote unquote, supernatural agents of divinity on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have that biblical tradition where humanity is made a little lower than the angels. But here we see a promotion where, in fact, the angels are the ones who are lacking in terms of those divine names that humanity is bestowed with. So in a sense, while they might seem powerful to us still, rightly so, we still have potentials that they lack.
Yes. The angels, at least in this cosmology, cannot but choose what God has chosen, right? Or what God has commanded, rather. Whereas humanity, at least in theory, can violate the command of God, even though even that violation, God subsists. So choice, this choice between right and wrong, which is relative, as we said previously, is something that the angels do not possess. We have
right, and that's always also been a bit of a existential paradox for me, because on the one hand, I think the insight of Islam that you mentioned earlier, that Islam is recognition of our contingent existence, utter dependence on necessary existence. That's exactly how I understand Islam. But existentially, like everybody else, I'm caught between, qadr and free will. We live in this remarkably intricate network of determining factors that play all kinds of conscious and unconscious roles on our decision-making power. So where is free will exactly? And one can always go to Imam Ja'far alayhi salam, that huwa amar bain al-amrayn. It's a matter between extreme determinism and extreme free will. And I think that
go ahead.
No,
Finish your thought.
I think that the Akbarian teachings that we've been studying kind of flesh that very vague saying of the Imam out a bit more if we take it in this metaphysical and epistemological register.
Big time they do. But the point is that this gives you a perspective. The practice to reach the realization you have to do. So how do we transcend this, or even integrate this intersection between free will and predestination? It is through the suluk.
Right.
That is the way out. Right? And to, raise that consciousness, annihilate, prune yourself, make yourself the alchemical laboratory on a constant, daily, eternal basis without ever seeking an end to this process whatsoever. That is
exactly.
that is the way out. and just understanding these axioms that we are the completely dependent, and that is ultimately what Islam really means. Everything else is dogma and this, that, and the other thing are kind of on the lower level.
Right, exactly. So I think I see that this is really the underlying assumption between or rather behind every piece of advice I've gotten for Saluk from my own direct teachers or in readings that I have done. I see the evidences in the practical advice that I have received or been given, and the metaphysics, the architecture that we're studying right now. I'm starting to see the practical connections to the theory.
Because
I would all.
this theory is only really understood once you put the practice into practice.
Right.
Yeah, when the process of the unveiling begins, the psychological unveiling, etc., then you begin to see this theory as actually literal. As a basically a manual.
It discloses itself through action.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say that with regards to the question of free will, that reminded me that from earlier mention of Spinoza, in Spinoza's system, there's no possibility of free will, but it's precisely in how this is different from it, that the concept of dialectic or the triplicity, as you said, that the ground, the manifest, and the ungrounding of it, it's that dialectic that we are in with the creation itself as finite beings, that where I think free will comes from, that we are not just automatons.
Yeah. But here's also the point. Free will, ikhtiyar, is the word in Arabic, ontologically only belongs to God, right? The necessary being. Yet we ourselves, even though we're contingent, we are part of that necessity. So as dependent beings who are predestined in certain areas, we are already always participating in the free will, in the ikhtiyar of the real. And that's the dialectic. To understand.
I like that idea that free will is adjured, through something else. Because normally, especially Americans, we think about it as a very discrete thing. Here's one choice, here's another. It creates a fork in the road. And while certainly, ostensibly choices exist, and there's potentialities and evaluations involved in it, as a Taoist or coming from that background a little bit, who's always trying to essentially not fret over these types of things, I've started to think of will and agency as concurrent or concomitant with inclination. So it is a side effect of having like a personality, basically, is what people call free will, which is the choices that, your personality is inclined to, quote unquote, choices.
Also, I remember being asked if I believe in free will, and this is before I started studying theology. And I remember my first response being, "Well, free of what exactly?"
Yeah, that concept of freedom also needs definition.
Yeah.
And the metaphysical concept of freedom is very different to the political one. Most contemporaries confuse the political with the metaphysical. That's where all the problems start, including people who study theology. They conflate political freedom with metaphysical freedom. Metaphysical freedom is a much more complex area, a lot more issues involved to flesh out before we can say yay or nay. But in this perspective, in this kind of perspective that even Arabi is expositing, we get the best of both worlds. But freedom or dependency and the liminal space between the two, the barzakh, is only understood by those whose veils are lifted. That is, those who are traversing the path consciously and doing wayfaring to God. Right? To use the Sanskrit term, these are the Jivan Muktis. right? To the degree that you are wayfaring to God, you are awake. So then you are cognizant of what freedom is and what dependency is. Until you are there, right, to even speak of these categories of freedom and dependency, you are just basically regurgitating by rote.
I've never heard that Sanskrit term before. What was
The
it?
Jivan Mukti, yeah. That's a very important term. It's the awakened ones, the
It's
liberated
kind of like the Ashavan in Zoroastrianism,
yeah.
followers of the spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
The liberated one. The Jivan Mukti is the liberated one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Nathan, you wanted to finish your thought.
Sorry, I think I actually lost track of that final thing that I was going to say. So maybe it will come back. But
Maybe it will come back.
The word mukti also has a very like Buddhist connotations of like being free from the cycle of
Of
existence.
birth and rebirth.
Right.
Yeah. Free of the
Yeah.
cycle of the birth and the rebirth. So the Jivan Mukti has transcended the karmic laws of causality of birth and rebirth, of endless birth and rebirth. But in this perspective, reincarnation doesn't even make any sense because the world is being constantly created and recreated. There's incessant creation. So every person, every consciousness is being constantly reincarnated in the same lifetime, let alone to come back in infinite more afterwards. So, and also because it is only God or the real that is the true subsistent. Just like in the Vedanta, the one and only true transmigrate is always ever Atman. It is never individual souls. Right? The Vedanta even rejects this literal concept of the reincarnation. So these are things to mull over in terms of freedom and predestination and how the matter is between the two. Everybody's gone into a
Thank you
state
so
of
much,
samadhi.
Vahid. This is very nice. It's very nice to have these kind of conversations. Thank you so much, Vahid.
You're very welcome.
If I if I can call you by your first name.
No problem at all. Yes, you may. Yes, yes you may.
I noticed the mala in your neck.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, these are tests. This is tasbih, but I was recently I wrote something out of inspiration. I shared it with Mary. It's kind of my tantric Sufi kind of meditation in the nature of Shakti as Allah. And I sent it to a friend of mine who in India studies the Sri Vidya tantric doctrine, which I'm very much attracted to because it's extremely Shakti focused. And he read it and he came back last night and called me a Mahakala. So yeah. So if you want to read it, get it from Mary. She's already seen this piece. This is how I look at things. I think these ideas that take the height of this kind of metaphysics and bring it back down to earth in practice, in the real flesh and blood of life is where things are at, rather than I think one of the bigger problems that we've had, even in intellectual ideas, is that they don't ground anything, right? This is one good thing about the tantric schools is that they are very desirous in and bringing everything down to earth. Okay, and insisting even in their metaphysics that the multiplicity is the perfection, the imperfection is the perfection. To contemplate this paradox is itself the liberation itself.
yeah. Would have you heard of the name David Bentley Hart?
Yes, yeah,
Do you have any opinion of him? Because I've been reading him a lot.
vaguely. What do you think of him?
He's a Christian universalist, and it's that strain of universalism Gregory of Nyssa, like that strain of thought, which I'm attracted to. I've also been reading Dostoevsky recently, and universalism has been very appealing to me. And I've been thinking about its role in Islam. I remember asking Mary about universalism in Islam, and if it even needs to be explicated in Islam.
It really doesn't. This is the real irony of it, is that, by definition, in the way that it addresses the whole of the human race, and from the very beginning of, especially the Surah Al-Nisa, the Surah of Women, where humanity are created from a single soul, this issue of universality is almost immediately settled. In a very succinct, beautiful, metaphysical way. So for me, this is where it's at, and so looking at someone as like Ibn Arabi, it is then that much easier for one to even then reach out beyond the actual formal exoteric tradition of Islam itself, and seek companionship with other cultural traditions. Because from my point of view, ultimately the mystery cannot really be languaged. We can, everything that we say about these traditions is an approximation. That's why you reach a point where trying to compare doctrines itself becomes a kind of fool's errand. You have to kind of even go beyond that. Let doctrine liquefy into yourself. Let them all merge in a sort of a liquid that you drink as the tea or the nectar of the gods. Because the reality is containing of absolutely everything. Every opposition, every contrary, everything exists in this, right? And every barrier that is created is a barrier that is artificially created by us. It doesn't possess other than an intelligible reality that we fabricate, which then, is another conversation about how powerful the projections of intelligibles by the human mind are to, create these realities that don't have any kind of essential existence, like concept of race and borders and countries and ideologies, and all of these are, these inverted intelligibles that take on lives of their own with human beings. But when we get beyond all of that, we realize that the reality is everything. It is all of it. Everything there is has the presence of the real in it. Everything, without exception.
Yeah. Rather than liquids, I often think of different traditions as creating kinds of aromatic landscapes, which I can inhabit for a momentarily, to momentarily inhabit a soundscape and feel like I'm part of it for now.
Yep. As Corban said, as I mentioned yesterday, the other lesson, in his book Avicenna and the Visionary Side of Corban, says that the true Gnostic has to have the ability to inhabit any spiritual universe at any time and feel at home in all of them. So, but practice is where it's at. These are not just fluffy platitudes. You have to taste it. You have to experience this within yourself. Anywho, we've gone for a good hour and a half. So that was good that I got to read this whole chapter. So this is what we'll try to do for the rest of these sessions on Ibn Arabi, is that I will try to read the whole chapter, so that then we get through these 27 chapters pretty quickly in the next 26 weeks. We just finished the first one. So for next week, obviously, we're going to be doing the chapter of Seth, which is another good chapter because it brings in the question of soteriology and spiritual authority in a very interesting way. Next week, obviously, we will start the tale of the Occidental exile for the Suhrawardi class. So until next weekend, everybody be well. Until then, Yahak.